My family looked down on me and kicked me out into the rain during their party, until I revealed who I really was and their faces went pale with fear. Hello, my name's Marjorie. They say family protects you. Mine, they erased me in silence, in speeches, in photo slideshows where my face was replaced by my sister's. At a party held in my parents' honor, I was escorted out in the rain like a trespasser, no seat at the table, no name on the screen. And when I looked up from the driveway, soaked and humiliated, I saw my mother watching through the window, doing nothing. But what they forgot was whose name was on the deed to the mansion. Why would a family treat one of their own like a ghost? And what happened when I decided to come back through the front door? It was one of those days where the sunlight felt dishonest, too bright, too cheerful. Savannah had that way of dressing up pain in soft spring gold, like it could convince you everything was gentler than it really was. I arrived alone. The gates of the Delan estate were already open, but not in a way that felt welcoming. The wrought iron seemed to glare more than shine, and the family crest, our family crest, looked as foreign to me as a stranger's name etched in marble. No one came out to greet me. I lingered in the driveway, stepping out of my car slowly, half expecting someone, anyone, to wave me in. Nothing. The gardeners pretended not to notice me. One of the house staff crossed the lawn with a tray of glasses and gave me a tight, closed-lip nod that stopped short of recognition. I wasn't surprised, but it still landed like a familiar slap. I adjusted my dress, smoothed the front of it the way women do when they need a task to keep from unraveling. Beige, safe, polite, like I was still trying to be the version of me they might accept. Inside the courtyard, the music was light and string-heavy, another layer of pretense. I walked toward the check-in table where a younger woman with glossy lips and a name badge shaped like a magnolia leaf greeted guests. When I approached, she didn't look up right away. "Hi," I said. "I'm Marjorie Delan." She glanced at me, then down at her clipboard. Her fingers tapped quickly. "Oh, I don't see that name here. Are you maybe with the catering staff or assistant to a guest perhaps?" The words didn't sting as much as they might have a decade ago. These days, they just sat there, heavy. Expected. "No, I'm family," I said, voice steady. "Marjorie, youngest daughter of Harland and Eleanor." Her eyes widened slightly, lips parting in that awkward smile people wear when they've already messed up, but can't figure out how to fix it without making it worse. "Right. Of course. My apologies. Please go right in." She didn't offer me a name tag. I stepped past the table and entered the ballroom, careful not to let the slight in my chest show on my face. This wasn't new. I'd learned long ago how to carry invisibility like it was tailored. Inside, the celebration was already in motion. Crystal glasses clinked. Laughter curled around the chandelier light, and the scent of old money, perfumed and rehearsed, hung in the air like roses past their prime. My siblings were seated at the head table. Vera, as always, was in the center, flawless, smiling like she was born for spotlights. She stood up just as I entered, raising a flute of champagne in a graceful arc. "To family," she said, "to legacy, to the people who carried this name with pride." Applause, loud, long. I clapped, too, because that's what you do. Even when you know you weren't included in the toast, a slideshow flickered onto the screens mounted along the walls. Childhood photos, black and whites, grainy Polaroids, candids from Christmas mornings, Vera at piano recital, Benedict at football games, Callista in her prom dress. I waited for mine. None came. I sat back in my chair, my hands still, fingers locked. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was taking inventory. How many times could a family forget your existence before you started to question whether you were ever real to them in the first place? A woman I didn't recognize approached me near the refreshment table. Her dress was too tight for her age and her eyes too sharp for casual conversation. "You look familiar," she said. "Are you the caterer's daughter?" I turned toward her slowly, taking a beat. "No," I said calmly. "I'm Vera's sister." Her cheeks pinked immediately. "Oh, I'm sorry. You just look so, never mind." She laughed nervously and excused herself. I didn't chase her awkward apology. I didn't need it. What I needed was air. I stepped outside onto the stone terrace. The afternoon sun had softened, dipping toward evening. It cast long shadows across the marble floor, and for a moment I just stood there, letting the warmth settle into my bones. This wasn't the first time I'd been erased in a room full of people I loved. But something about today, it was louder, more deliberate. The omissions weren't accidental anymore. They were structural, designed. I thought about the years I'd kept my distance, not because I didn't care, but because I'd grown tired of fighting for a place that was never freely given. But not today. I had let them narrate the story for too long. Let them carve my face out of the family tree and frame it with silence. Let them decide that I was the branch no one needed. But I knew something they didn't. This wasn't just another insult. It was a page before the chapter one would write myself. And in that chapter, I wouldn't be quiet. I wouldn't be graceful. I'd be honest. Let them drink their champagne. Let them pose for the cameras and bask in the fantasy they built around themselves because the storm was coming. And for once, I wasn't going to stand in the rain without speaking. I stayed outside longer than I meant to. The hush of the garden gave me something the ballroom never did. Space. Just enough of it to breathe without clenching my teeth. When I finally walked back inside, the lights seemed harsher, the smiles more brittle. The program was shifting towards speeches. Staff moved around quietly, refilling drinks and adjusting floral centerpieces, and guests leaned in closer to their tables as if preparing for a performance. The familiar cues of Deland family traditions were unfolding like well-rehearsed theater. I found my seat again, third row from the front, far enough to be unnoticed, close enough to be uncomfortable. Then Vera stood. The room adjusted around her like she had gravity. My sister was made for rooms like this. Her voice practiced, her posture perfect. She took the mic like it was born in her hand. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, tone warm, but clipped. "It's no small thing to gather in celebration of legacy, of what's been built, what's been sacrificed." She glanced toward Benedict and Callista. Her eyes skimmed past me without a pause. As the eldest daughter, I've had the privilege of watching our family grow and evolve, of stepping in where needed, of holding things together when times got uncertain. There it was. A few heads nodded around me, a couple of soft murmurs from the cousins' table. "Some of us," she continued, "have carried more than others. That's the nature of families, isn't it? We all play our parts. Some stay, some float in and out." And there it was again, sharper this time. The floating one, the absent one, the not quite Deland daughter. Polite laughter followed. A few eyes flicked toward me, then quickly away. I didn't move. My hand stayed folded in my lap, but my fingertips dug crescents into my palms. If I bled, I wanted it to be private. When the applause died down, a soft clinking drew attention to the screen behind Vera. The first slide of a photo montage faded in. Harland, my father in his younger years, standing proudly beside Vera at some charity banquet. Another photo followed. Callista in her college graduation robe. Then one of Benedict holding a newborn, his son, I think. I waited. And then it came. The image was from 10 years ago. My father recovering from heart surgery, lying weakly in his chair. A young woman knelt beside him, reading aloud from a worn paperback. I recognized the moment instantly. It was me. Only the caption below it read, "Vera, bringing dad comfort during recovery." I stared, not because I was shocked. It takes a lot to shock me these days, but because I was watching my history be rewritten right in front of my eyes, cropped, labeled, claimed. No one else flinched. Why would they? The story had been so smoothly edited, the lie tucked beneath a polished smile. I felt something crack, not loudly, but deeply. As the photos kept flipping, a tap on my arm broke my daze. A tiny voice. "Excuse me, are you the babysitter?" I looked down. Callista's daughter, blonde, bright-eyed, maybe 5 or 6, holding a juice cup and blinking up at me with complete sincerity. I smiled because what else could I do? No, sweetheart, I said gently. I'm your Aunt Marjorie. Oh, she looked confused, then wandered back toward the desserts. I caught Callista watching from across the room. Her face was unreadable, but she didn't come over, just sipped her wine and turned away. And Eleanor, my mother, she was seated at the end of the front table, back straight, eyes forward. She hadn't looked at me once since I walked back in, but I could feel her seeing everything. That was worse than not being noticed. When the crowd began to move toward the buffet, I slipped out again, this time through the side doors that led toward the garden. My heels clicked lightly against the stone path. The light was fading now, the early evening casting long shadows across the hydrangeas. I sat on a low bench beneath an arch of wisteria. From here, the noise of the party was just a murmur. Distant laughter, clinking glasses, hollow echoes. In the quiet, my mind drifted to Christmases where only 3 stockings were hung on the mantel, though there were 4 kids. To family newsletters that never mentioned what city I lived in, even when they listed everyone else's zip code, to the framed photos on the hallway wall, each sibling in chronological order, except for me. Mine was on a shelf in the laundry room next to the spare batteries. There are erasures you get used to. But tonight wasn't a simple forgetting. It was correction, revision, erasure as policy. They weren't pretending I didn't matter. They were proving it. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I heard the shuffle of feet, the rustle of silk dresses passing behind me. The buffet must have opened. I stood, straightened my shoulders, and walked back toward the house. I didn't go back to my seat. Instead, I walked along the edge of the room unnoticed until I found the nearest exit. A small hallway led to the coat check. I didn't need my coat, but the solitude gave me a moment to collect my breath. I pulled out my phone. No messages, no missed calls, except one text. Oswald, you okay? I stared at it. He always knew when to ask, and he never pushed, never made me explain what I wasn't ready to say. I typed back, all good, just a lot of Dylan energy. Then I deleted it. Instead, I locked the screen and put the phone away. They had given their speeches. They'd told their version of the story, and the audience had clapped. But the performance wasn't over. Not yet. The screen still glowed with the mislabeled photo when a soft knock came at my shoulder. Not urgent, almost polite. I turned, expecting another server offering drinks. Instead, it was Uncle Griffin, smiling like we were about to share a secret. Hey, Marjorie, he said, lowering his voice just enough to pretend it was something discreet. Mind stepping into the library for a second? Just a quick thing for the estate records. Real minor stuff. 5 minutes, tops. 5 minutes. That was how all bad ideas started in this family. Framed as nothing. No pressure. No fuss, just a signature here, a quick word there, and before you knew it, you were erased with your own pen. Still, I followed him, not because I trusted him, but because I wanted to see what they were planning now. The library was off the main hallway, tucked between the study and the sunroom. It smelled of old leather and newer lies. I used to read in here as a child, cross-legged under the window, hiding between books when Vera made me cry. Now the long walnut table was cleared except for a leather-bound folder. Benedict was already seated. Vera leaned against the fireplace, arms folded, one leg crossed elegantly like she was about to deliver a TED Talk. Oh, hey sis, Benedict said, his voice as smooth as his suit. Glad you could stop by. I wasn't given a choice, I said, not smiling. Griffin opened the folder and flipped through a few pages. We're just trying to get some clarity for the future of the estate, he explained. Make things cleaner, less overlap in the paperwork. You know how these family properties get tangled. I didn't sit down. And what does this clarity cost me? Vera stepped forward, smiling just enough to irritate me. Nothing. Truly, it's just a formality. You're not really involved in managing the estate, and since you built your life elsewhere, she trailed off like she was giving me space to agree, like I was supposed to nod and admit I didn't belong. Griffin slid the folder toward me. Here, it's a voluntary transfer of oversight. Symbolic, really. Keeps Benedict as sole trustee. Just keeps things streamlined for when Dad dies. I finished for him. Silence. I flipped through the pages. Legalese clauses, estate divisions, but the key line was in bold. The undersigned Marjorie Deland relinquishes all current and future rights to Deland House, including but not limited to decision-making, inheritance, and representative presence effective immediately. Symbolic. Why now? I asked, still reading. Why today? Benedict shrugged. Everyone's here. Easier to get this done while we're all in one place. It's not pressure, Vera added quickly. Just efficiency. They were so polished, so casual, like it didn't matter. Like I should be grateful to be offered a chance to step away cleanly. You've always been a little more independent, Benedict continued. And we thought, maybe this gives you freedom while we handle the day-to-day stuff here. I looked at him. You mean the legacy, the PR, the chance to be the Deland hero? His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. I placed the folder back on the table, closed it gently, and said, no. Griffin blinked. No, I repeated. I won't sign it. Vera stepped closer. Marjorie, don't make this difficult. You've always said you didn't want to be involved in the estate. I never said I wanted to be erased. The room went still. Then Benedict exhaled through his nose. Well, all right. No one's forcing anything. Just thought we'd offer. How generous, I said, and walked out without another word. By the time I returned to the ballroom, the mood had shifted again. A new slideshow had begun. This one titled The Deland Siblings Through the Years. The title flashed in cursive gold on the screen above the stage. Music played softly, some instrumental piece that made everything feel more romantic than it deserved. I lingered at the back near the double doors. The first few photos were expected. Baby Vera with a bow in her hair, Benedict in a Halloween costume, Callista at her debutante ball. Then came a black and white photo I hadn't seen in years. My father sat in an armchair, his face pale from post-surgery fatigue. A young woman knelt beside him, reading aloud from a paperback, his hand resting on hers. It was me. But the caption read, Vera comforting Dad during recovery. I didn't even flinch this time. The air left my lungs slowly, not from shock, but from recognition. It wasn't just a misprint. It was a replacement. They'd taken my image and given it to someone else. I stayed in the shadows, watching as guests murmured approvingly, touched by the moment. Some even clapped. Another photo slid in. Me again, this time from a family fundraiser organizing the silent auction table. The caption, Callista's tireless work behind the scenes. They weren't editing me out. They were repurposing me. Vera passed nearby with a glass of wine, pretending not to notice me, but I caught the flick of her eyes toward the screen, then toward me. She knew exactly what she'd done. I didn't stop her. What would have been the point? This wasn't a fight I could win with confrontation. It wasn't about right and wrong. It was about narrative control. And for years, I had let them own the story. But not anymore. I moved quietly to the far wall away from the crowd and leaned there, watching my own face fade in and out of their version of our past. My phone buzzed in my clutch. Oswald, you okay? I didn't answer. I just stood there, letting the sound of my name, rewritten and rebranded, settle deep into the hollowness that had started forming long before today. They could steal my image. They could recast me in their pageant of perfection. But the truth, that was still mine, and soon they'd feel the weight of it. The walk from the hallway to the reception felt longer than it should have. I didn't rush, didn't drag my feet either. I just moved steadily, holding the silence from that last conversation like a brick in my chest. I had warned them, not in anger, not in drama, just in truth. That was the part that unsettled Vera, my calm, the way I said it like it was already decided. The ballroom was buzzing again. Servers brought out the last round of hors d'oeuvres. Guests began shifting back to their seats. The sun outside was dimming and the chandeliers began to cast a golden glow over everything, trying their best to pretend it was still a celebration. I hadn't even made it back to my table when I noticed something strange. There was a soft exchange between the stage manager and one of the staff. Then the coordinator glanced around, clipboard in hand, clearly searching for someone. I walked toward her. "Excuse me," I said gently. I was wondering if it would be possible to say a few words. Just a short message to the family. She looked at me with surprise, blinking as if I had asked to host the whole event. "I'm sorry," she said, checking her list. "Vera is the only speaker listed for the evening." I kept my smile tight. "Could you check again?" She glanced down, then again up at me. I'm sorry. This part of the program is closed." Miss Isolde was very specific. Of course she was. "Thank you," I said, stepping back. "I understand, but I didn't." Not really, because I wasn't asking to give a speech. I was asking to exist, to have 5 seconds of air, to say my father's name out loud, to acknowledge the years I had spent holding up this family in ways they'd never admit. Vera, standing near the bar, caught my eye and gave a soft shrug, as if to say, "That's how things are." And Eleanor, my mother, sat still as a statue at her table. Her fingers rested elegantly on a champagne flute. She didn't look at me once. I moved to the side of the room and took a glass of water, holding it like it might anchor me. There were pockets of conversation floating around, distant cousins chatting about vacation homes, someone in the corner debating country club memberships, and then I heard it. At first, a snicker, then words, light and cutting. "You remember when Marjorie worked that front desk at the roadside motel?" A voice familiar, too polished. One of Vera's friends. I didn't know her name. Just her type. Another voice chimed in louder. "Oh, totally. I mean, look at her now. Married into a castle practically. Some girls really do find the golden ticket." More laughter. I turned toward the patio, letting the sliding glass door close behind me. The air outside was cooler now, dusk settling in. The hedges cast long shadows across the stone tiles. I stood near the edge, looking out at the garden lights flickering to life. I didn't flinch at their comments, but I remembered every night shift, every rude guest, every hour I worked while Vera posed in fundraisers and sipped from crystal glasses. I remembered making coffee at 5 a.m. in a uniform too stiff, pretending not to notice when guests assumed I was barely holding on. I had held on. They just never looked close enough to see it. I stayed there a while, letting the quiet settle again. Eventually, I heard the sliding door open behind me. Soft steps. Perfume. I recognized. "Marjorie," Vera said. I didn't turn. "Why don't you come back in? People are starting to notice." "Notice what?" I asked. "That you boxed me out of my own family." She sighed. "Don't do this here. It's not the time." "When is it the time?" Vera paused. Then came the line that sealed everything. "You always make things harder than they need to be." I turned to face her. "You think this is me making it hard?" I said calmly. "All I wanted was 5 minutes to say something real." "You made sure I couldn't." "I didn't make sure of anything," she said too quickly. "Of course you did. Like you made sure to rename me in that slideshow. Like you made sure to ask the staff not to give me a seat at the front." She tried to smile. "You're being dramatic." "No, I'm being accurate." She stepped closer. "Marjorie, don't make this night about you." I leaned in, my voice low, steady. "It never was, but now it is. And if you keep going, I will take back what's mine. All of it." For the first time, I saw it. A crack in her. Her lips parted. She blinked, searching for her usual condescension and not finding it. But I didn't wait for her to speak. I walked past her and back inside, not even bothering to look if she followed. By then, dinner was being prepared. The staff rolled out long white tablecloths and a soft instrumental played in the background. I made my way back to my seat, sat down, and watched the room from a distance. I had given them one final chance to be decent. They chose pride. I didn't wait to see Vera's reaction after I walked away. That wasn't the point anymore. I wasn't trying to make a scene or start a war. I was trying to end one quietly, firmly, finally. By the time I made it back to my seat, dinner service had begun. Servers in black slacks and white vests moved gracefully between tables, setting down dishes with practiced ease. The scent of roasted duck and garlic potatoes filled the ballroom, clashing with the tightness in my chest. Someone behind me whispered a compliment about the floral arrangements. Someone else laughed too loudly at a joke I didn't hear. And then my father stood. The mic picked up the soft rustle of his suit as he adjusted it at the collar. Harlan Dillon was not a man who spoke often in public, and when he did, it was usually brief and practiced like a closing argument. But tonight he seemed to linger at the podium, gazing across the room like a man surveying his own legacy. I want to thank everyone, he began, voice deeper than usual. Tonight means more than I can say. It's not just about milestones or estates. It's about roots, history, the people who carry your name forward when you're no longer around to do it yourself. A few polite nods from guests, a murmur of agreement. Vera, he continued, eyes locking with hers. You've stepped up in ways I never expected. You've made the family proud. She smiled demurely as if it was a burden she graciously accepted. Benedict, he said, you've handled our legal affairs with integrity. I trust you. Benedict gave a small modest nod. Callista, he added, voice softening. Your heart has always kept this family kind. She blinked, caught off guard, then dabbed beneath her eye with a napkin. Then came the pause. Each of our children, he said slower now, has played a role, some more present than others. The room didn't move. Even the forks froze. I stared at him, not blinking, not breathing. He didn't look at me. That one line, 7 words cut sharper than if he just said my name and left me out. Some more present than others. It was the final curtain, the quiet downgrading. He hadn't forgotten me. He had chosen to exclude me. I felt something cold settle into my hands, though they were resting in my lap. I didn't get angry, not immediately. I just went still until the screen behind him lit up again. A slide appeared, gold cursive gliding across the projection. Thank you to our loyal children. 3 names, Vera, Benedict, Callista. That was it. No room left for ambiguity, no space for misunderstanding. I didn't expect applause, but it came anyway. Light, awkward, unsure. The kind that says, I guess this is the part where we clap. A woman sitting at my table, her name escaped me, turned slightly and leaned in. Her voice was low. Wait, you're not listed. Weren't you the one who? She stopped herself. I didn't respond. The lights dimmed again as the servers brought out dessert. I stood. I didn't need more sugar. I needed air and space and distance from every lie this night had tried to feed me. But instead of heading toward the doors, I made a different choice. I walked straight toward Vera. She was standing near the gallery wall, laughing with 2 acquaintances from the board of the local arts council. Her back was to me when I tapped her shoulder. She turned slowly, brows lifted, smile already poised like a weapon. Marjorie, she said, smooth as honey. Everything all right? I didn't raise my voice. You've had your moment, I said, meeting her gaze. I'm giving you one last offer. End this now. She blinked, momentarily caught off guard, then tilted her head. And what exactly am I ending? The narrative, I said. This little play you've written where I'm invisible, forgettable, the one you performed so well for every guest here. Vera laughed softly. Marjorie, you're overreacting. No one's trying to, I'm not overreacting. I'm responding. There's a difference. Her lips pressed into a line. You always had a flair for drama, she said. And you always had a knack for rewriting things that weren't yours. Dara glanced around. A few heads had turned. The conversation had lowered to a murmur. "What could you possibly do?" she asked, voice tight now. "Not much," I said. "Just ruin your entire narrative with a single document." That wiped the smile off her face. I didn't wait for her reply. I turned and walked away. My steps measured, each one louder than the silence that had followed my father's toast. People didn't stop me, but they watched and I let them. If being quiet had earned me this erasure, maybe it was time they remembered what happened when I stopped being quiet. There's something about being watched through glass that makes a person feel less human, like you're a scene in a play, not someone with blood in their veins. As I stood on the gravel path outside the Delan estate, soaked to the skin, I looked up at that wide, gleaming second-floor window. Dara stood there, motionless, her wine glass in hand, and beside her, Eleanor, my mother. Neither one moved. I didn't wave. I didn't flinch. I just let the rain do what it came to do. It had started as a drizzle when I stepped out, a soft tapping on my shoulders, a breeze through my hair. By the time I reached the end of the walkway, it was a downpour. My heel slipped slightly on the stone. My beige dress clung to me like a second skin, but I didn't turn back. I stood still for a moment, just long enough to feel the cold settle under my skin. Then I reached for my phone. The screen lit up with a dozen missed notifications. Nothing from my family, of course. A weather alert, a bank reminder, a news notification, and Oswald. I tapped his name. He picked up on the second ring. "Marjorie." I didn't even get to say hello. "I'm outside the Delan estate," I said. "They kicked me out." A pause. Not shock. He never gave me that. Just a breath of silence, like he was making space for me to continue. "It was Vera," I added. "Benedict called security. I didn't wait for them to drag me. I walked out myself." Another pause. "Send me your location," he said. "I'm on my way." That was it. No questions, no judgment. I texted him the address anyway, even though he'd been here a dozen times. As I lowered my phone, I noticed a figure standing beneath the awning near the front entrance. The security guard, not one of the regulars, probably contracted for the event. He looked uncomfortable, not cold, just unsettled. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, voice low, but sincere. "I was told, I know," I said, cutting him off gently. "You're doing your job." He looked relieved and ashamed all at once. "I offered to walk out," I added. "It wasn't your doing." He gave a small nod. "Still. It didn't feel right." I nodded back. Then I walked past him, down the gravel driveway, past the parked cars that lined the estate. The rain had soaked my shoes through. My curls were ruined. My mascara probably looked like war paint. Good. Let them see what they made. At the end of the long driveway, I leaned against the stone gate pillar, letting the raindrops run down my face. I wasn't crying. Not yet. But I was unraveling quietly, thoughtfully. This wasn't the first time they'd pushed me out of something that was supposed to include me. But this was the first time they'd done it in front of strangers. The first time they'd made it official. Marjorie Delan, unwanted, uninvited, and now unmasked. I closed my eyes. The storm was louder now. The wind picked up, pulling at the trees lining the estate fence. Somewhere down the road, a car approached, its headlights barely cutting through the curtain of water. I stepped forward slightly. The sleek black car slowed as it neared the entrance. The passenger side window rolled down. "Get in," Oswald said. He didn't shout, didn't ask, just offered. I opened the door and slid inside, dripping rainwater onto the leather seats. He didn't flinch. He reached behind me, pulled off his coat, and draped it around my shoulders. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Neither did he. He didn't need to. Finally, I turned to him. "They humiliated me," I said publicly. Deliberately. He exhaled, hand still on the wheel. "I know," he said. You don't even know what happened. I don't need to. He pulled away from the curb, the wiper slicing across the windshield in rhythmic swipes. You didn't deserve that, he said after a moment, and they'll regret it. I don't need them to regret it, I replied. I need them to see me. Oswald nodded. Then we'll make them see you. We drove in silence for several blocks, the storm blurring everything outside the windows, trees bent under the wind, street lights flickered like dying fireflies. I rested my head back against the seat, feeling the warmth of his coat seep into my skin. Then softly he said, "Do you want to go back?" I opened my eyes, stared ahead. "Yes," I said, but not to plead, to remind them what they threw away. Oswald nodded once. "Then let's go," he said, and turned the car around. As the mansion reappeared through the storm, my pulse stayed steady. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel ashamed. I felt like something was finally clicking into place. They thought they'd broken me, but they forgot who I married and what I've inherited. The silence inside that ballroom wasn't empty. It was heavy, loaded. A room full of people holding their breath and pretending they weren't. The kind of quiet that wasn't absence, but tension, a pause before the storm shifts direction. I stepped forward slowly. Oswald's coat still draped around my shoulders, damp but warm. His hand had released my arm the moment we passed through the doorway. He didn't guide me. He didn't need to. I knew exactly where I was going, and I knew what I was walking into. The lights hadn't dimmed. The chandeliers still gleamed like nothing had happened. But the air had changed. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Forks hung midair. And Vera, God bless her polished instincts, had already turned toward us, one hand frozen around the stem of her champagne glass. It slipped. The stem shattered against the marble floor, the sound sharper than anyone's gasp. A few heads turned. Someone muttered, "Oh no." And then Oswald's voice cut through the room, calm, cold, clear. "Good evening," he said. "I believe you've forgotten to honor someone important." He stepped aside and I walked. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate. I walked like I was supposed to be there because I was. I walked like I belonged in that room in that moment because I did. And every single person in that space, every guest, every cousin, every colleague who'd politely laughed at Vera's revisionist history was about to remember exactly who I was. The click of my heels echoed against the silence. I stopped just short of the main table a few feet from Vera, who was now frozen, lips parted slightly, still holding the broken base of her glass like a trophy. Eleanor sat beside her, hands folded in her lap. She didn't look at me, but her jaw was tight. I glanced across the room. The slideshow was still paused behind them mid-transition, my face fading into Callista's on a still frame. Fitting. "I'm not here to make a scene," I said softly, but loud enough for every person to hear. "I'm here to reclaim what's mine." There was no applause, no gasps, just the soft creak of someone adjusting in their chair. Vera finally spoke. Her voice cracked on the first word, but she covered it fast. "Marjorie," she began with that sickly sweet tone reserved for public embarrassment control. "This isn't the time." "No," I interrupted. "This isn't your time. You've had that. Every curated moment, every fabricated memory, every photo you cropped, captioned, and rebranded." Her mouth opened, closed. "This isn't a fight," I continued. "This is a reminder." I reached into the inner pocket of Oswald's coat and pulled out the envelope I'd prepared weeks ago. I held it up, not dramatically, just visibly, and walked to the event manager's table. "This is a copy of the controlling interest papers for Delan House," I said, setting it gently down. "Transferred to me by Clodagh Braxley in 2008, legally notarized and recorded. You'll find the deed references in the original signature page inside." The woman blinked at me. Vera's face had drained of color. "I've let my name be erased from your speeches, your slideshows, and your place cards," I said, turning back to the room. "But I won't be erased from the property that carries my family's name." Someone near the back whispered. "She owns the house." I smiled. Just a little. Not just the house, I replied. The trust, the land, the legacy. Benedict stood now trying to regain control of the room. His hands were out, palms down, like he was talking to a jury. Marjorie, he said, voice even. Let's not turn this into something it doesn't need to be. This already is what it is, I said. I've just removed your ability to pretend otherwise. Callista, bless her conflicted heart, looked like she might faint, but she didn't say a word. I'm not removing anyone, I added. No one's being evicted, but the rules are changing. What rules? Vera snapped. Her mask cracked completely. I turned to her, voice still calm. The rules that say you can rewrite history and no one will correct you. The rules that say humiliation is a family tradition. The rules that say the quiet sister doesn't get to speak. The silence that followed felt different this time. Not empty. Charged. And then I walked past them. Not away. Through. I passed Oswald, who hadn't moved from his spot. He nodded at me, that same steady presence he always was. I slipped my hand into his for a brief second. Then I let go. I walked through the crowd, people parting as I passed, some still whispering, others pretending to adjust napkins, and I headed toward the front doors. I wasn't leaving in shame. I was walking into my story. The door that once closed behind me now stayed open. I didn't need anyone to hold it. And for the first time that evening, maybe the first time in decades, I felt seen. Not as the assistant, not as the afterthought, as the rightful woman of that house. I didn't look back when I walked out of the ballroom. I didn't need to. Some moments are so final, they don't require confirmation. They settle into the air like stone, unchangeable, immovable, known. Oswald was waiting just past the entry not far from the reception table that had once acted like I didn't exist. He said nothing, simply stepped beside me as we reached the center of the room again. This time I didn't hesitate. I walked to the edge of the stage where the event planner stood, half hidden by a standing floral arrangement. I set the manila envelope down on her clipboard gently but deliberately. These are my documents of ownership, I said, my voice steady. I inherited controlling interest in this estate from my grandmother, Clodagh Braxley. The originals are on file with our family attorney. These are the certified copies. Her mouth opened, unsure whether to nod, ask a question, or simply vanish. Behind me, a rustle. Vera had started to move, her voice just beginning to rise in objection. But Oswald stepped forward before she got a word out. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. That envelope, he said, addressing the room as calmly as if reading a weather report, is legally binding. Any attempt to interfere will be addressed through counsel. Vera went still. Her hands, clasped around another glass of champagne, trembled just enough for me to see. I turned back to the crowd. I've stayed silent through countless dinners, events, holidays. I've smiled when you laughed at stories rewritten at my expense. I've clapped when I was left out. And I've given this family every opportunity to treat me with dignity. I took a breath. Tonight, I watched my name erased again, this time in front of 100 people. And so, tonight I'm reclaiming it. I gestured toward the planner, then to the screen still hanging above the stage. There will be no more edited photos, no more slideshows where I'm cropped out, mislabeled, or replaced. No more speeches where my father forgets the child who held his hand through recovery. No more birthday cards sent a month late. No more invitations where I'm a footnote or a formality. Vera's jaw clenched. You're making this personal. It is personal, I replied. It's a family estate, Vera. That's as personal as it gets. The tension in the room had shifted. I could feel it. Guests who'd spent decades sipping cocktails and whispering judgments now looked uncertain, uncomfortable, like maybe, just maybe, they were starting to see something they hadn't allowed themselves to see before. I turned toward the security guard, the same one who had escorted me out just an hour ago. You are following orders, I said to him. But next time, I'd suggest thinking about who those orders are protecting. He nodded slowly, then looked down, and with that, I walked down the center aisle of the ballroom and out the main doors. No applause followed, but silence did. That was enough. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The pavement still shimmered beneath the lights, slick but calming. Oswald followed me to the car, but before we climbed in, a flicker of movement caught my attention. Across the circular drive, a group of people was gathering. Cameras, microphones, flashes, the press. I paused. I hadn't planned for them. One woman stepped forward. Someone I recognized from the local morning show. Marjorie Delan, she called, walking briskly toward me. Is it true your sister had you removed from your own family estate? Vera had leaked it. Or someone in the room had. Of course she had. Control the message before the truth lands. I didn't flinch. Yes, I said plainly. It's true. Do you have a statement for the public? I looked directly into the camera lens and spoke without rehearsing. For a long time, I thought silence meant grace, that if I stayed quiet, I was being noble. But there is nothing noble about letting others build their story by tearing down yours. Oswald placed a hand lightly on my back. I turned to him, nodded, then back to the press. There will be no further comment this evening, I added. Good night. We climbed into the car and the crowd parted as the driver pulled away. 2 days later, the headlines were everywhere. Socialite sister ousted from own estate. Delan family legacy shaken by inheritance revelation. Erased, then reinstated. Marjorie Delan speaks her truth. I didn't read the articles, not fully, but I saw the fallout. Vera's PR contracts dropped her. Her board seat at the Historical Society was quietly revoked. Her carefully built house of mirrors had shattered in the reflection of one truth. And I did what I always do when things crack open. I created something. I met with a nonprofit that specialized in supporting women estranged from toxic family systems. I listened to their stories. I gave them my own. And when they asked me why I was interested in funding a retreat for survivors, I told them the truth. Because sometimes family doesn't break you in one moment. It breaks you over time, inch by inch, silence by silence, until you forget you're worth anything at all. So I gave them the estate. Not symbolically, legally. I transferred my inheritance into a foundation bearing my grandmother's name. The same woman who long before anyone else saw me for who I really was. A woman worth remembering. A woman who doesn't need to ask permission to exist. 2 years is long enough for pain to settle. Not disappear. Not fade into nothing. Just settle like sediment in a riverbed. Still present, but no longer stirring with every step. I moved to Tybee Island 6 months after the estate confrontation. I didn't write letters. I didn't send a group message. I didn't sit across from anyone and ask for permission. I didn't need to explain myself. Not anymore. Oswald understood before I said a single word. He looked at me the day after the ruling, saw the way I stood by the window, my fingers wrapped around the edge of the curtain like it might hold me upright, and simply said, "Salt air helps." So, I went looking for it. What I found was a pale yellow cottage just a short walk from the waterline. One-story, wraparound porch that creaked in the wind. Shutters the color of sea glass, cracked in places but still hanging on. There were no marble floors, no monogrammed hand towels, no name carved into stone pillars like there had been at the Delan estate. This house didn't need a name to prove its worth. But in my mind, I named it anyway. Mercy's Edge. The walls inside were painted soft blues and worn whites. Instead of family portraits curated for press photos, I hung thrift store finds and student artwork, canvases with stories still raw in their brushstrokes. Nothing about this house tried to be perfect. And I liked that. I liked that it made no promises it didn't keep. Books lived in stacks by the window ledges, their spines sun-faded and well-loved. Above the kitchen sink, bundles of dried lavender hung from a beam. I stained myself. Each morning I brewed my coffee with real cream. No more motel coffee stirred with a plastic stick. No more tea handed across polished tables by people who were only nice when others were watching. I taught 2 mornings a week at the local community center. Art classes for women trying to start again. Divorcees, widows, survivors of 100 unnamed things. Women who carried invisible bruises and smiled a little too brightly. And me. We weren't broken. We were just tired of being unseen. Oswald came on weekends. He stayed in the guest room, not because there was distance between us, but because this house was built as a solo shelter, and he respected that. He never asked if he could move in, never tried to fix or organize or smooth things over. He showed up with groceries, made me laugh, and left space for the quiet. When the past came up, he didn't turn away from it. He just let it arrive and sit for a while, like weather. Then it passed. It was on one such evening, just after a spring thunderstorm had rolled through, leaving the windows speckled with rain and the sky streaked with silver, that someone knocked on the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. The knock was light but insistent. I opened the door to find a young woman standing on the porch, damp at the edges, hair sticking slightly to her forehead. She looked no older than 20, maybe younger. In her arms, she clutched a large portfolio, the edges worn from travel. Her voice trembled. "You're Marjorie Delan." I nodded slowly. She took a deep breath. "They referred me here from the foundation. They said if I needed to talk to someone." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come in." She walked inside like someone entering a room they thought might disappear. I handed her a towel and led her to the couch. She smelled faintly of salt and city, of someone who hadn't paused in weeks. She held the portfolio like it might float her. "I'm sorry," she said, voice small. "I didn't know where else to go. I heard what you did about the estate, the way your family treated you. I just didn't think people like you existed." I smiled gently. "Most people don't until they do." We sat. The rain had picked up again, soft now, no longer dramatic, just steady like memory. She told me her story piece by piece of being disinherited because she refused to marry the man her father chose, of being erased at dinners, of family photographs where she'd once stood replaced with floral arrangements, of watching her younger brother inherit her home while she was handed silence and the keys to a car with no gas. She didn't weep, she didn't rage, she just spoke like someone trying to prove to herself that the story still belonged to her. And I listened, not to fix, not to comment, just to witness. When she finished, she looked at me, not with expectation, but with fear. The kind that asks, "Did I survive the right way?" "How did you survive it?" she asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. The question wasn't for inspiration. It was for survival. I let the weight of it settle. Then I answered the only way I knew how. "You don't survive it," I said softly. "You rebuild around it." She blinked. I continued. "The wound stays, but so does the strength. You learn to stop bleeding for people who never even noticed you were cut open." She looked at her hands. "I thought it was just me." "It's never just you," I said. "But it always feels like it." I stood, walked to the kitchen, and returned with 2 mugs of tea, chamomile with honey. She took hers like it was a gift she didn't think she deserved. We sat in silence, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full. Eventually, she stood, portfolio still in hand. "Thank you," she said, stepping back out into the misty evening. I watched her disappear into the fog, her shape blurring with the rain. Later that night, I sat at my writing desk with a blank page in front of me. The window rattled softly, the wind gentle against the glass. And I wrote a letter, not to Vera, not to Eleanor, to me, to the version of myself who once begged to be noticed, who once believed love had to be earned by staying silent. "Dear Marjorie, thank you for not giving them the last word, for walking away, for surviving, for choosing the kind of peace that doesn't come with applause, and for planting something new where they tried to salt the earth." I signed it, folded it, slipped it into a drawer, not as a goodbye, but as a bookmark. The fire didn't end me. It illuminated the road. Sometimes closure isn't delivered in a courtroom. Sometimes it looks like a porch light in the rain, a warm cup of tea shared with a stranger, and the sound of your own voice no longer asking for permission. Sometimes justice is simply this: you're still here and you're finally free. Sometimes the hardest decision isn't standing up to others. It's walking away and never looking back. Marjorie didn't need revenge. She needed peace. And when she chose herself over their approval, that was the real victory.